Okay, thanks again. And now I pass the floor to Tālis Disenkovs.
Thank you, Anda, and thank you all for joining this third seminar on ethics of care in circular bioeconomy. My name is Tālis Disenkovs. I'm senior researcher at Baltic Studies Center, and as an organization, we coordinate this project called Circle. It stands for Promoting Collaboration for Sustainable and Circular Use of Bioresources Across Agriculture, Forestry and Aquaculture. And our project is funded from Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway grants. I have two overview slides, if I may, to introduce a bit the project. I will try to share them now. So this is our project with an objective to strengthen interdisciplinary knowledge about innovative circular business models, collaborative arrangements and policies across and between those three prominent sectors of bioeconomy, agriculture, forestry and aquaculture. Indeed, we are a very interdisciplinary team. We are 4 partner organizations, the Baltic Studies Center, mostly sociological expertise, ARI and other partner economists from Latvia, then Estonian University of Life Sciences, represented by different disciplines, but mainly environmental science. Ruralis, a team from Norway who hold political science expertise, and Vilnius University with philosophical and environmental sociology backgrounds. So we focus on bioresources, but not all kinds, but mainly byproducts and waste, which originate from these sectors, and then look how these resources are flowing, being valorized for different other kind of products and materials. So, but our main interest is social at large, to look into collaborative arrangements and business models standing behind. And the project is heading towards end. We have done great many things from conceptualization of bioresource flows, circularity itself as a concept, to media analysis in 4 countries. We have also composed a database of 150 initiatives of circular bioresource use. We did also 12 in-depth case studies with circular companies, three companies from each participating countries, as well as consumer interviews, focus groups with stakeholders. We also look into future, trying to build future scenarios, how circular economy might evolve in these sectors, and great many other activities, including study tours, visits together with students, etc. Now we are close to finalization, doing dissemination work, and this webinar is a part of that. Also writing scientific papers, but you will hear some ideas which are in the pipeline being soon published from our Vilnius University colleagues, who are mainly addressing the consumer aspect, but also the value aspect, which we shared among different stakeholders. So, and this is my short introductory. Thanks again for joining, and now I pass floor to Vilnius colleagues who will moderate further and present their own stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Tālis. Today we will have two presentations. One will be more from philosophical perspective, where we'll look into how we should care about waste. Yeah, and second one, it will be about consumer perspective in circular economy. And please, dear participants, be active, write your questions in this general chat of ours, or in very end, raise your hands and we will give you floor to ask some questions. Okay, so we will have like, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes for that. So don't be shy. If you have some questions, ask them. Okay, and now I will pass floor to Aiste, and she will talk about how we should care for the waste. Please, Aiste, floor is yours. And I will share slides. Aiste, we don't hear you. Aiste, you are muted. Aiste, you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, the goal of this presentation is to consider ethical dimensions of circular economy. Generally, circular economy is based on the critique of current linear model of production and consumption as unsustainable. Materials are used once and then discarded. As such, this model exceeds the planet's carrying capacity through overuse of limited resources and pollution. Alternatively, in the circular economic model, waste becomes a resource to be used for the second time and perhaps fourth time. The idea of circular economy is not new. It was first articulated in terms of ecological economics in the context of debates about Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in the early 60s, and thus further developed in the 70s. Since 2010, it has been codified in various legislative and non-legislative actions in the EU and other countries. Two distinct agendas stand out among the efforts to develop circular economy, promoting responsible customers and fostering business model innovation. In the case of both approaches, ethical and moral considerations play a key role. In the first case, there is a growing interest in consumer responsibilization, or an understanding that ethical considerations shapes the way consumers behave. For example, Lechtokunas consider food waste reduction as ethical work. In the second case, scholars have approached circular economy as moral economy because of the centrality of value in economic activities. Even though relevant studies recognize the importance of ethics and value in circular economy, most of the literature tends to prioritize the economic aspects of circular perspectives over ethical and moral considerations. In these presentations, we seek to advance a multi-scalar understanding of the ethics in circular economy by focusing on waste as its central component. Our analysis combines the works of Gay Hawkins and the ethics of care approach to elucidate different aspects of our relationship to waste in the context of circular economies. To be clear, we make a normative approach. Our ultimate goal is to advance more sustainable environmental practices. The main idea of circular economy is that of transformation of what is defined as waste into available resources. In the scholarship on resource use, such a transformation of waste is often described in terms of 9 strategies, prescribing how humans should relate to the things that soon will be waste or have been rendered as waste already. That is, refusing, rethinking, reducing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing, repurposing, recycling, and recovering. However, as Kircher et al. Note, the scientific literature on circular economy, only 3 strategies of reducing, reusing, and recycling are used. This might be due to the fact that this scholarship lacks a deeper understanding of waste management. It's mostly seen as a practical matter that can be solved by technical or policy means. Yet, practices that are related to circular economy depend on intricate intersection of social, cultural, political, and personal factors. Quote, we experience just a small part of a huge system that controls the waste streams. Beyond every act of discarding, there are myriad networks, norms, morals, structures, ideologies, politics, assumptions, interests, power relationship, waste, and systems that affect what becomes waste and how it is handled, so that it ends up in the bin. End quote. Secondly, and relatedly, even though researchers focus on waste management, they are mostly silent about waste itself, or to be more specific, we consider waste only as material stuff, ignoring its social, cultural, or ideological, ethical dimensions. As Johansson suggests, such a lack of attention to ontology and particularity of waste phenomena is another manifestation of a continuation of a political tradition of hiding the waste away and forgetting about it. Waste and related categories of garbage and trash permit not only our relationship with material world, but also play a fundamental normative role in human life. Quote, the creation of garbage is the result of separation, of the desirable from the unwanted, the valuable from the worthless, and indeed a worthy or cultured from the cheap and meaningless. End quote. While waste is usually defined through negative moral notions, in circular economy it acquires positive quality because it can become a resource for creating new valuable things, and in this way escape further depletion of natural earth resources and destruction of the environment. However, even after such a deliberative change in its meaning, waste does not escape negative moral and ethical connotations. According to Kay Hawkins, guilt, moralism, and despair pervade contemporary discourse on waste. She argues that existing representation of waste in the environmental discourse are built on fear about the end of nature. Quote, our imaginations are overflowing with the horror of waste, end quote. Closely related to this imagery are two representations. The first one presents nature as passive victim of gross exploitation and contamination, and the second, humans as those who had been alienated from it and lost all connections with the environment. Quote, the capacity of humans to destroy nature with waste renders them morally bankrupt, and the capacity of nature to function as dumping ground renders it passive and denatured. End quote. Cultural and social imaginaries that depict nature as dying under the mountains of garbage are not neutral, but are marked with grief and despair, and, according to Hawkins, lead into alienations, distance, and disinterest. On the other hand, environmental campaigns that rely on imperatives of moral obligation to save nature can lead into resentment, a sense of ecological duty being imposed upon them, or it generates despair that nature is already dead and there is nothing to do about that. Hawkins argues that environmental education built on the idea of rational obligations for the global ecological survival and the care of the planet addresses our moral reason, but not our bodily sensibilities and feelings. And they make us unable to imagine different relations with waste that could avoid resentment and despair that has become so prevalent in environmental educational strategies. Hawkins states, quote, domestic waste education privileges a fairly restricted set of responses to waste, and these are inextricably linked to the constraints of moral codes, which easily slide into moralism. Guilt, resentment, and anxiety are not politically productive. Sure, they may have mobilized people to change their habits, but they may inhibit other responses and possibilities, other ways of being with waste, end quote. Moreover, Hawkins insists that her aim is to open up other ways of thinking about the social regulations of everyday waste practices beyond command moralities that prescribe us not to litter, refuse plastic bags, reuse, and recycle. She seeks to find new ways of talking about human relationship to waste that are built not only on such negative and politically unproductive emotion as guilt, despair, resentment, but something more positive. For this reason, she looks onto waste phenomenologically and explores how waste mediates relation to our bodies, prompts various habits and disciplines, and orders relations between the self and the world. She is interested in effective, habitual, embodied aspects of how humans relate to waste and how various waste practices creates a different self. In the following section, we complement Hawkins' idea that we need to generate new imaginaries of human waste relations with the ethics of care approach, which is one of the contemporary Western approaches in moral philosophy and combines feminist, ethical, and political perspectives. Contrary to the dominant moral theories such as deontology and utilitarianism or virtue ethics, the ethics of care underscores the moral significance of various relationships and dependencies in human and non-human life, and considers how they shape moral agency and ethical considerations. The fundamental moral concept in the ethics of care is caring, which is often contrasted with the notion of justice. Contrary to the notion of justice, which assumes objectivity, universality, autonomy, independence, and rationality, the notion of care focuses on interdependencies, particularity, relationality, affect, embodiment, and vulnerability. For example, in contrast to the ontological and utilitarian perspectives, where it is assumed that it's enough to define rational principles and rules of moral behavior for proper actions to emerge, the ethics of care suggests that rational deliberations over moral actions and principles are always situated within particular social, cultural, and political contexts, making it nearly impossible to deduce universal values. The ethics of care thus recognizes that even the most rational deliberations over moral principles are always shaped by particular experiences, relationships, affects, and embodied engagements. The ethics of care emphasizes a broader and more encompassing view of moral life and what counts as ethically relevant issues. The care ethics approach shows that what is relevant for our moral agency often goes far beyond what is studied in dominant ethical theories. In this view, our moral agency depends not only on fully informed rational deliberations, but also on embodied and effective relational practices, reflective and unreflective types of other human beings, living and non-living entities, their needs, and our abilities to respond in proper ways to social and cultural circumstances, gender inequalities, and unequal power dynamics. How can such an ethics of care be applied in the context of our relationship to waste? Fiona Robinson links our abilities to care for one another and the whole environment in the following way. Quote, care ethics understands morality as located in responsibilities and practices of care among human beings in the context of webs and networks of relationships. From this perspective, moral relations of care cannot be established with inanimate thing or feature of the natural environment, such as rocks, trees, or lakes. Rather, seen through the lenses of care ethics, the health and flourishing of natural environment must be understood as intrinsically connected to the health and flourishing of persons. Our ability to care for each other depends fundamentally upon our ability to maintain a healthy and natural environment. End quote. At first sight, this kind of caring for environment might look like enlightened anthropocentrism, where caring for nature stems from inspiration to care for people. But we argue that such an approach offers a useful conceptual lens for articulating how environmentally friendly practices might be encouraged and adopted in everyday activities, as well as business initiatives leading to circular economy. Central for this approach is Thornton's conceptualization of care. As Thornton notices, caring is not only about intimate and daily routines of hands-on care. Care involves a large structural questions of thinking about which institutions, people, and practices should be used to accomplish concrete and real caring tasks. In this respect, circular economy, as an initiative fostered by EU in general and the individual states in particular, can serve as an example of such wider care for the environment, when the amount of waste which is produced by industry and consumers is being encouraged to be reduced and reused. The main focus here is on how to establish caring practices that would be beneficial for the environment with a focus on waste. In our previous work, we have developed the concept of environmental care, which can be seen as an habitual and effective practice that unfolds in relational context, including non-human environment and combines specific disposition, such as attentiveness, competence, affect, and responsivity, as well as social and institutional dimensions. Here we will try to demonstrate how care can inform our relationship with waste as well. Joan Tronto's foundational work on care forms the basis for applying the ethics of care in practice. Tronto defines care, quote, as a species activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. The world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex life-sustaining web, end quote. In this extensively cited definition, Tronto presents care as concerned not only with humans, but with all living things and essences that surround us. She states that care is not restricted to humans' interaction with others. We include the possibility that caring occurs for objects and for the environment as well as for others. Environment comes as an inseparable part of our livelihood, and this relationality enables us to think about activities that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world. Our relationship with waste comes as an important part of our daily and business activities, and responsible behavior with it becomes a part of our ethical stance. We show how care in circular economy manifests in different stages of care and how we can incorporate waste into moral domain. Tronto indicates 5 main stages or elements of care. In the first stage, care is related to attentiveness, that is practiced when particular needs are recognized and detected. Quote, genuinely to care about someone, some people, or something requires listening to articulated needs, recognizing unspoken needs, distinguishing among and deciding which needs to care about, end quote. This attentiveness to the needs of others can be applied in a broad range of personal, social, and political contexts. In the context of circular economy, it might seem that the focus should be to understanding what waste is a major problem and recognizing that something should be done about it. If in the interhuman context, attentiveness means that I am able and willing to see the needs of a person, in the circular economy context, it means that I can see the needs of the environment flooded with garbage and human or companies who are in the need of additional resources. However, such an approach would miss the broader perspective that Hawkins has articulated. Quote, general character of these waste habits is informed by relations marked by distant disposability and denial. Consumer cultures and the technocratic logics of efficiency and concealment have produced a distant relations with wasted things, even as amount of waste have escalated phenomenally. External systems of removal from garbage truck to sewers have dramatically reduced the demands that waste makes on us. It simply gets taken away. And while we know generally where it goes, the invisibility of these places, their location underground on the margins of the cities, facilitates denial or active not knowing. End quote. Hawkins and the ethics of care invites us to think about these systems relationally. In circular economy, such an approach reimagines consumptions and production processes as entirely wasteless. That is, an endless circulation of matter and energy, or what Hannah Landecker conceptualizes as metabolism. This kind of attentiveness creates a space for new ideas and innovative business models. In the case of businesses, this means reconceptualizing and reorganizing production in such a way that there is no one end product, but multiple streams of objects and energy that are diverted for different uses. In other words, all materials emerging in the process of production are seen as being of equal importance, and thus should be managed with appropriate care and attentiveness. On the household level, this means promoting a model in which particular consumer products are conceptualized as just one stage in this long cycle of circulation of objects and energy. For example, when selling consumer technologies, it should be clear what previously used objects were used in it and what new things will be made from it when the current use of this particular technology ends. Similar metabolic circularity could be emphasized in the context of food, transportation, housing. Here, attentiveness provides a framework for considering the needs of future generations, but also recognizing biotic communities involved in production of particular objects. In so doing, it moves beyond the current focus of reusing, reducing, or recycling in circular economy to political reimagination of production and consumption spheres. The second stage of care is linked to responsibility. After the needs are recognized, one should take responsibility to meet them. This stage embeds care in the social and political dimension, as one becomes responsible for organizing, finding resources, or paying for those who agree to take care for somebody or something. In circular economy, the stage of care relates to political dimensions. When circular economy practices are encouraged, business are stimulated, and even grants and expert guidances are offered in order to, quote, explore opportunities to cut waste, increase revenue, and reduce costs through circular economy business model. End quote. For example, in 2022, European Commission announced Circular Economy Action Plan, where it is stated that, quote, EU needs to accelerate the transition towards a regenerative growth model that gives back to the planet more than it takes, advance toward keeping its resources consumption within planetary boundaries, and therefore strive to reduce its consumption footprint and double its circular material use rate in the coming decade, end quote. So this stage of care in the circular economy is associated with the actions in the political sphere and taking responsibility, but as well is related to responsibility in the private sector. Citizens should be willing to adopt practices that are related to reduction of waste. The third stage of care refers to the actual caring work. Quote, competence is the main focus here. Competence is a moral dimension of caregiving. Incompetent care is not only a technical problem, but a moral one, end quote. Competence is always contextual. One set of abilities may be needed in taking care for the children, and different ones are required while taking care for environment. When care is performed incompetently, essential needs are not met, which at times can do significant damage. In circular economy, it relates not only to political action plans, which could be made competently and with environmental vision, but also to businesses, that they should try to work with waste in the most effective ways. Competency in circular economy is defined as, quote, functionally linked complex overview of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that enable successful task performance and problem solving, end quote. Looking from the perspective of the ethics of care, the requirements to do actual caring work by implementing circular economy practices competently is very important. For example, the widespread practice of waste-to-energy incineration is considered to be unacceptable. The European Regional Development Fund and the Cohesion Fund offers free alternatives to incineration, additional capacity for waste recycle, separated waste collection, and waste reuse. So we can see that not all possible ways of eliminating waste are acceptable, and some businesses which practice garbage incineration, although might from the first glance appear environmentally friendly, are actually harmful for the environment. In this respect, it echoes Toronto warning that incompetent care might do significant damage. The fourth phase of care requires a response from the object of care, and it's supposed to indicate whether care has been good, adequate, sufficient, successful. It is important to include care receiving as an element of the caring process because it provides the only way to know that caring needs have actually been met. When we are looking for a moral dimension in the practices how humans are handling waste, this phase raises most difficult questions. How can things that we consider as waste indicate good care? How is it possible to make sense of relational ethical dimension between human and non-living things that enter the sphere of our care? Here we would like to invoke the conception of vital materiality by Jane Bennett, who understands vitality as, quote, the capacity of things, edibles, commodities, stones, metals, not only to impede or block the will or designs of humans, but also to act as quasi-agents and forces within trajectories, propensities, or tendencies of their own, end quote. Her idea of the agency of the things that produce helpful or harmful effects in humans and other bodies can justify why ethics of care should pay close attention not only to human-human or human-other living beings relationship, but as well look closer into dimension of ethical care that focuses on things, more specific things we see as waste. It helps to see waste not merely as passive, lifeless matter, but a present that is capable to make a difference, produce effects, alter the course of events. Waste has the capacity to act as quasi-agent because it possesses what she calls a think power. Quote, the curious ability of inanimate things to animate, to act, to produce effects, dramatic and subtle, end quote. She insists that non-subjects and the material agency of non-humans and not quite human things can move us to the emergence of more ecological and more materially sustainable modes of production and consumption. How we can do that? That leads to the second argument of how waste can respond to our caring or not caring. Waste is not simple material things that appear before our eyes, but are also constituted by various intersecting personal, cultural, social, political, and physical contexts. Here, Bennett explains material bodies as assemblages, groupings of diverse interactive entities and forces, which interact with other assemblages to form larger networks of agency. It does make sense to talk about responsiveness towards our care from the things, waste, or what results from their transformation, keeping in mind that the response about good, adequate care comes from assemblages of different interactions, things, and factors. And that relates to moral attention to the demands or needs of different forces within those assemblages that are waste. For example, an environmentally responsible person finds a pile of tires in the forest and reports them to environmental inspection, and after a few days the tires disappear from a place. Does such a response, there are no tires, nature is not polluted, a manifestation of good care? At the same time, this question cannot be answered without recognizing that all tires can be easily be delivered to the waste collection sites, taken to the tire dealers, or left at the companies providing maintenance and repair services. Here, the concern is that people continue disposing their old tires in the forest in the first place. Care is multidimensional, so should be the response. In this example, adequate care is indicated not only by my personal efforts to keep the forest clean of tires, but also by the wider context of what Bennett calls the assemblage. The state and its institutions, private businesses, people's knowledge, awareness, habits, etc. This wider context means that there are multiple venues for recycling tires, but also that there are public educational campaigns and information for citizens about the existence of such possibilities, as well as established norms and practices about acceptable ways of handling waste. These assemblages create or does not create the circumstances for adequate care to spread. Both ordinary citizens and circular economy developers should be more attentive and realize that the response, whether the care was good or not, comes from different but intersecting levels, and the most obvious positive result does not always identify that the care is really sufficient. That's why it's so important not to forget Rondo's suggested fifth phase of care, which implies that everybody should be involved in caring practices. Quote, democratic politics should center about assigning responsibilities for care and for ensuring that democratic citizens are as capable as possible of participating in these assignments of responsibilities, end quote. The fifth phase is important for circular economy because it emphasizes that it's everyone's responsibility to take care of waste. Politicians by issuing environmentally friendly guidelines, businesses by implementing environmentally friendly practices and engaging into sustainable models, and people reducing, recycling, redesigning, renewing, repairing, and recovering things that are seen as waste in their everyday life. Taking care of waste at this level can mean three things. At the policy level, it can mean not only creating guidelines, but also supporting and promoting environmentally sustainable social, political, and economic infrastructures.
Thank you, Aiste. I will stop to share our presentation. Yeah, so I remind you, if you have some questions, please write them in this general chat, and we will come to those questions in the end. And now, Diana, floor is yours. And I will share your slides.
Thank you. My name is Diana Mincyte. I am Associate Professor of Sociology at the City University of New York, as well as Vilnius University. So this project is an extension of the work that Aiste and Renata have been doing in environmental sociology and philosophy, and we've collaborated a number of years, and it's been a pleasure to be part of this circular project. So I will shift my presentation to a slightly different dimension of the question of values and ethics of care in the circular economy. We will look at what we have done in the Circle project to understand the consumer perspective within the circular economy.
Diana, and I have difficulties to share your slides. 1 minute. I cannot find them on my screen. 1 more minute. Okay, I will try like this. Excuse me. Maybe now. 1 minute. That's odd. I cannot.
It is not unusual. It's
Yeah, those are open, but I cannot see them.
there is an option, more windows. If when you open the share option, it should be at the bottom. It says more windows, so it might be under these.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not used to Teams. Thank you. I see.
Thank you. And Renata is in fact helping me because my computer was chopping up parts of the slides, so we are in a better shape. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So this time in this collaborative project, we have Aiste, Renata, as well as our brilliant graduate student, Ieva Šakelaitė and Pia Ote from Ruralis. So it's an interdisciplinary team, and we're working on a paper that focuses on a part of this presentation that I will share right now. So next slide, please. This presentation looks at two particular areas. We look at what we have done at Circle, the overview of the study of consumer perspective that was driven by the question of how do the consumers and general public understand their place in the circular economy. And the second very brief reflection, which is the central part of our paper, focuses on the challenges and opportunities to think through how to implement circularity-based principles in industrial agriculture. Next slide, please. The point here is to look at the definition of the circular economy from the way that has been historically studied. That the idea is that we are focusing on developing an industrial system that is restorative and or regenerative by intention and design. So in this definition, again, we are looking at a systems level to create a systemic industrial economy, a modern economy that is not going back to some, pre-industrial times, but we really are focusing on developing technologically based sustainability. Next slide, please. And a result, and clicking one more time will open the text in there. Excellent. So here, Ellen MacArthur's foundation work has been central for advancing and spearheading the understanding of the circular economy in policymaking, as well as among the kind of research that is happening. And what you see is this the graph that was also posted on the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, the main page explaining what a circular economy is. It shows the consumer and user as the central actors within that economy, who are at the lower bottom of the graph, and all of the additional processes and flows of materials are coming and going through there. However, the focus of efforts has been on the superior design of materials, products, systems, and business models. So far, most of the work, both in terms of the design and in terms of the companies working on it and policy making, has been to jumpstart the development of collaborative arrangements within industries and across different economic sectors. And a result, this next slide, please, we have ended up in a situation we have been paying significantly less attention to consumers and users and the public who seem to be the central component of the economy, and yet they tend to be overlooked in these models. And the growing literature on these issues, as examples listed on the slide, have pointed out that as a result we have this top-down industry and business-centered approaches dominating the literature, scholarly literature, and policy-making as well. So next slide, please. And as a result, the Circle as a project has included a specific work package focusing on consumers and filling that gap, beginning to fill that gap, trying to understand their place, what it is now, and how consumers themselves understand the circular economy. So we defined 3 questions that we looked at in the project to focus on the consumer perspective. They include: how do consumers engage with the circular economy and their behaviors, in particular in relation to bioeconomy? How do they understand the concept of the circular economy as it is presented in media debates and policy documents? And what are the key drivers and roadblocks to participating in circularity at an individual household level in terms of everyday practice for the consumers? Next slide, please. So we came up from developing answers to these questions. We found that circular practices are popular among consumers, and they are already thinking and practicing them in the form of composting, recycling, waste sorting and management, buying sustainable products, repairing, refurbishing, all kinds of sharing platforms that have emerged. However, many of the consumers and users do not consider them to be circular practices. They see it as common sense, as something that people do. So there is space for bridging links, conceptual links in the public debate between the circular project, that's a policy, developmental policy, and what people do in everyday life. We also found that the circular economy is associated with sustainability, responsible consumption, practical sense, high quality products, good taste, local food, and that all of these areas are really motivated by care. That care is central, that care is about nature and health of family members, and there is a sense of responsibility for oneself, family, distant others, but also for non-human nature. That all what consumers are doing is really grounded in these commitments to care for the immediate environment and people, and for even the global scale and concerns with climate change. So again, there is an opportunity to tie this public care with the policy making in that is central for advancing circularity. Consumers also expressed concerns with greenwashing and deceptive marketing. And we also find that main sources of information were traditional media, company websites, social media, influencers, but also media pressure from their peers and experiences with family, growing up in households, how parents were teaching them to care for items, how to dispose and use and repair things, and how important these practices were to educate the consumer in this kind of immediate sense family setting. There is a lot of concerns among the consumers about the lack of convenient infrastructures, and that is something that there is an interdisciplinary bridge to be drawn with what the Estonian colleagues are doing, and the Latvian colleagues as well as Norwegian colleagues are doing, with kind of business models and policy making, as well as the actual infrastructures for managing waste in terms of connecting these with consumers and their uses more immediately. Next slide, please. So how did we arrive to these findings? In 2 ways. We conducted 6 to 8 interviews in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Ukraine, and we have been lucky to include colleagues from Ukraine, and focusing groups in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Norway with stakeholders. Next slide, please. So we did an empirical study, and here we ran into a complexity and challenge of how do we define a consumer, because consumer is no longer this passive shopper for things. And items, it's somebody who is actually producing something by repairing, refurbishing, managing their waste, sorting their waste, puts an burden on consumers at home to do work. So they are becoming part of the production cycle in certain ways that tends to be, again, overlooked in the literature and public debates. And also there, within the broader circular economy and business models, most parts of participating companies are not actually selling their products to consumers. They are selling waste to each other. So their consumers as a general public don't even feature. So as a result, we relied on the definition of the consumer to focus more specifically on the public member. If you hit one more time, Renata, there will be the definition. So it's a person who purchases products and services that include involved in circularity-based business models, that they are actually recognizes that they participate through sorting and waste management, and consume and buy the products. Next slide, please. So the stakeholder was a much more straightforward definition, and they were representatives of governmental and policy-making institutions, scientists, representatives of companies, of non-governmental organizations, consumer associations, local communities and individual activists, legal scholars and practitioners, and journalists and influencers, those who are participating in the public debate and policy making and companies' economic sphere. Next slide, please. So we, first of all, the study was rather small, and most of it we've tried to focus on building on the case studies we did in the earlier stages of our research. And it is not based on random probability sampling. So that means that even as we try to have a representative sample of age, gender, educational backgrounds, we ended up with using the snowballing technique, combining people who were already involved in the circular economy, whom we knew. So we cannot extrapolate and generalize the findings, and yet we hope that they give us a slice of information of what is happening in this area. Next slide, please. For the interviews, we had 4 groups of questions to understand and gauge consumer awareness of the circular economy, factors and values motivating consumer participation, barriers to participating in the circular economy, and possible solutions. And that last part was probably mostly related to the stakeholder focus groups rather less than with the individual consumers. Next slide, please. What we ended up with was 36 interviews in 5 countries, and in looking at the age brackets, most of them were represented in the younger end of the spectrum, those who are both practicing more and aware more, again, leaving us with a challenge of how to connect it to all age groups, to connect the circular economy to the large groups outside of these age brackets. Next slide, please. An interesting finding is something that is confirmed in general, but also an area in and of itself, that women were first more willing to take time to participate in answering the questions, and also recognizing that women still continue to do more of the household work that involves fixing and refurbishing and taking care and doing work in the kitchen. And as a result, there is an important gender dimension as we think about involving the community in a broader community, in the public, in the circular economy, in terms of recognizing that added work that women are doing for managing waste, for example, and also making this more transparent and having a better policy setting and better infrastructures to make that work easier. In terms of educational levels, what you see, we had a higher number of university degree, bachelor's degree obtained participants, as well as postgraduate, master's and PhD degree obtained group of participants, just because of our sampling approach, but also because of the awareness of the circular economy here. The next slide, please. In the focus groups, we had representatives of very diverse sectors. Academia-based researchers were the highest represented group, but we also proactively spoke with the government representatives in all countries, not only in the context of stakeholder groups, but also as part of the circular project more broadly. And so we are in conversation with the governmental representatives. We also spoke with the focus groups included non-governmental organizations, doctoral students, managers in companies, waste management companies, representatives, industry developers, business managers, a wide range of participants, bringing a really diverse perspectives with the goal to understand how they see the public's participation and the role of the consumer in the circular economy, and how to tie these issues, bring them back to their workplaces. Next slide, please. So findings, what we found was that consumers practiced circularity in multiple ways. And the most common practice that they mentioned was waste management, that is sorting and recycling and being very much aware of the waste coming from their households. And that was proactively avoiding single-use products and packaging. So if you look at the first four practices that include waste management, composting, avoiding single-use products, buying, acquiring second-hand products, these are the practices that out of 36 that many consumers mentioned in that they do actively in very frequently. But also this includes also avoiding food waste, repairing clothes, not buying new things, investing in long-lasting products, volunteering in sustainability projects, using reusable food packaging, buying local, choosing sustainable transportation, a host of practices that consumers are aware and already practice. And that is encouraging, but also, again, surprising how in our interviews we had to prompt consumers to think about these issues and practices, as they did not think about themselves as participating in the circular economy. Next slide, please. Barriers to participating, including the lack of information and or this information being confusing and sometimes conflicting about what circular products are. Again, there was a concern with greenwashing, and in some cases, consumers said that some products may be of poor quality or not looking as good, of course, that some of the, for example, in food, they might look worse because you are using the products that are have not been accepted by the standards to the main supermarkets. They may look different shapes and forms and stuff like that. However, affordability was a key component and issue that many consumers mentioned, that sustainable, organic, and circular products tend to be sold as added value and thus have command the higher prices. Consumers also spoke about routines and habits and how difficult these are to break, especially if there are no convenient infrastructures, that it adds more work for them. And these are the challenges that our policymakers and business members, community members can address and have the power to do so. Next slide, please. And finally, something that was resonating deeply with our own work that Aiste and Renata presented before is how central care was in how consumers spoke about what motivated them participating and thinking and already practicing the circular economy. They spoke about care for the health of one's family and future generations in terms of packaging, such as everything being wrapped in plastics for food, and being concerned with the consumerism that is abound and waste that it generates, and seeing that waste that is on the household level, how much it gets produced, even as people care not to produce it. There was a concern about the negative impact of human activity on the environment. This not only about immediate family members, but about the broader human impact and climate change and wildlife habitat destruction, animal welfare issues and pollution, and something that people observe in their environment as well. And then there was this personal and collective responsibility stemming from belonging to the global ecosystem and a sense of a shared future. And that ties back to seeing family and future generations as combined, as how will our great-grandchildren will live in the world that is being polluted by us right now. It was also important that people spoke about skills acquired within families. And in the Baltic states that had lived through socialism and shortages, there was a discussion of how there is a continued sense of understanding of how important it is to be not wasteful and to emphasize the using every piece of item for all kinds of additional uses, to reusing them and saving, and that also applies to Ukraine. I just mentioned the Baltic states, of course. And the peer pressure that there is a growing generation of circular economy participants who are much more aware of this, and peer pressure to be more sustainable and good citizens of this environmental citizenship global project that drives participation in the circular economy. Essential for this were values of empathy and care for humanity, along with concerns for justice, that future generations have just as much right to live in a clean environment as we do, and that those translate into actions. So this is what we found in our study, a rather small study of looking at the consumer perspectives and realizing how much potential there is to ground the current policy making in these consumer already existing concerns. And I would like to move now to a specific context to how to think about care in agriculture, and particularly in industrial agriculture. Next slide, please. So here we see that consumers care as individuals through their relations to others, both human and non-human, and how do we actually ground that care in industries and companies? Next slide, please. So the issue in implementing care in industrial agriculture in particular, because again, we think about the circular economy as an industrial system, is that there are particular challenges that are built into the industrial economy that are not easy to reorganize. First of all, economies of scale have led to consolidation and intensification of agriculture. That means that in financial incentives support technological solutions to problems. And that emerges, we end up in a situation where there is a sense of technology for technology's sake. Introducing tractors, for example, means that the next round of development will not go back to trying to use more manual labor, for example, but it will continue to on this level of investing in other more automated, larger technologies, bringing in, has been for decades, to increasing the size of tractors, to increasing the size and use of fossil fuels. So the concern is that even digital technologies that are implemented are usually tied into the already existing large technologies, rather than investing in a smaller scale, helping and workers to do a more local scale, more smaller, immediate sense of providing tools for working more locally and more small scale agriculture uses. And that means also that care itself on these large industrial enterprises gets outsourced for smaller companies to come in and do assessments and focusing on measurable benchmarks rather than approaching it holistically. In other words, instead of thinking about regenerative agriculture in terms of how do we restore the biotic life biodiversity in soil, that requires a lot of different inputs and a lot of different approaches, we tend to focus on CO2 limitation of production, right? It's very easy to measure, and companies say that's how we were measuring our success. So that leads to this kind of complicated situation where we have limited opportunities to look holistically at creating regenerative and sustainable agriculture. Moreover, this focus on technology in industrial agriculture disrupts care by changing interactions and moral dispositions. And that ties to the previous presentation, because there is care is so much about eliciting responsibility, interactivity, and understanding of the needs of care. For example, in robotic milking machines, scholars show how farmers become technology specialists who are sitting in the offices and observing and managing technologies rather than interacting with animals and seeing their particular needs and recognizing these needs. All of that work of identifying needs that Joan Tronto discusses in the first stage, understanding what the needs are, gets mediated through technology. And that may or may not, but in most cases does lead to less empathy and understanding of needs in specific animals and environmental systems. And that can lead to less responsibility. Again, then it usually then elicits these technological solutions to solving these issues, rather a more holistic and diverse responses, and that results in a more kind of limited range of care practices. Of course, there is new opportunities for bringing in care by including, for example, developing better sensing technologies that replicate that care, that provide us with more data and what the needs, for identifying the needs. However, research has showed that a lot of that information that gets gathered, it only gets diverted for productivity and increasing productivity, and less for identifying well-being of animals and well-being and restorative regenerative practices. So next slide, please. And something what our paper is developing and focusing on is another dimension of care in industrial agriculture that has been overlooked, is that we have not thought about care in a very specific, historically and socially situated spaces. And what that means, and especially with collaboration of our Ukrainian teams, is that agriculture is a geographically situated industry, unlike plastics making, right? I mean, it's very specific to climate, it's very specific to regions. What is grown is determined also culturally, what has been grown there before, and locally existing property structures. For example, how agriculture is different in Eastern Europe versus Western Europe because of experiences of socialism. So we need to make sure that when we look at these policies, we also are very attentive to the situatedness of these systems, because that's where care can be brought in and used, implemented, because of these very specific historical experiences of caring and practices, already existing practices of care. For example, again, in the Baltic states and Ukraine, there is a thriving sector of smallholder agriculture that tends to be left behind, and that's a very important concern for the investments in the circular economies, simply because to qualify as a circular business, there is a lot of paperwork is involved, and it involves a lot of evaluation of various circular practices that may not be easily used and applied in and evaluated in smallholder agriculture, even though farmers are already doing that they are caring for the land, they are using organic fertilizers, they are using waste. It's just for them, it's very difficult financially to be able to make sure that they are recognized as practicing circular economy. As well as another dimension, and that is ties back to the findings of our interviews, is that there is a gender dimension of care work. And in fact, across Europe and the United States, women are 3 times more likely to be owners and managers of non-productive farms. In the Baltic states, it's even higher. It reaches over 60% in Lithuania and Latvia, that these smallholder farms, very diverse farms that, and mostly organic farms, are owned and managed by women. And again, they tend to have less resources and social capital to be able to participate and get funding and apply for these scheme fundings coming from support from the European support to advance regenerative and restorative agriculture. Even as they do this, they are at risk of being marginalized in the funds that are increasingly being funded for industrial development, and with the risk of making it even further more industrial in the kind of the circular economy funding scheme. So this is the last slide that kind of gives us the risks and hopefully opens new opportunities and possibilities to actually make that circular economy very much situated in a particular context, and very much situated and responsive to local conditions that are very important. So the last slide asks for questions and elicits answers. So I hope that we will have some questions and a discussion on the social dimensions of the circular economy.
Thank you, Diana. Yeah, maybe we have some questions. Please don't hesitate and ask if you have them. At least I hope that you have got the idea that care is very complicated and is everywhere. Okay, at least I don't see. Oh, Talis, please.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, thank you for all presentations. I have a question to Diana, to your point on digitalization of care. It's very interesting point, and you also argue that care is a behavioral. There is a personal interaction involved with humans or non-humans. And industries that do this sort of digitalization of care, like milking robots, etc. Are you very pessimistic about this trend? I mean, even the milking robots, perhaps they provide rewards, animal welfare rewards to cows, improving their wellness, well-being and feeding. They might even choose probably the milking time and get fed, etc. Aren't there also potential, in particular, if we look at the outcome of care, what should be the outcome? And if cows are happy in the end through robots, through sensors, isn't it a good care, even if it's not human, if it's even dehumanized, so to speak?
This is a very important question, and that's part of what we are working in our two papers. What is a good care? In terms of cows in particular, there are several exciting studies that look exactly at that question of technology implementation, and they find that animal welfare is situational. That means that when cows are milked in parlors, when cows are brought into the parlors to be milked, they don't have a choice. They're milked twice a day, whether they want it or not. They continue to be living in the count herds. They are they are organized in this kind of social structure of animal sociality, and they show that, for example, the robotic introduction of robots is undermining their natural social structures, that animals all of a sudden have to become individual decision makers, that they are forced, instead of following the lead of the main cows, they are forced to follow their own intentions and desires to be milked. And many cows don't comply with this, and they had to be eliminated from the herd because they simply do not want to go through these individual gates to be milked. So so our welfare understanding, we tend to understand autonomy as something that we want, and and think of animals as wanting also autonomy, but not all animals want autonomy, right? So it's a very complicated issue to say how does the animal feel about this, whether they prefer to be in herds or they prefer to be milked as individuals. I personally think we have a lot of opportunity to have with digital technology, and I'm not pessimistic about this at all. My concern is that the financial incentives for developing the technology tends to go into the emphasis on productivity, and rather than responding and interacting and listening to the needs of animals, right, and needs of plants, and kind of being more responsive to them, we are kind of again having a different layer of technology that will seek to extract it in productivity in just different ways, hopefully more humanely, hopefully in a less painful way, with less suffering. But nevertheless, the pressures are such that that it will emphasize and focus on producing more milk, and the cows that just don't decide to go will not live, right? And that's the concern. So it's a kind of convoluted answer to a rather obvious issue, but that's what the question that, or the first paper that we're writing is, that question is, how do you scale care? How do you care at a distance? And that literature is growing, and we are part of that conversation. Can you care for something outside of this kind of immediate sense, what you understand? And how do engineers who are at the forefront of developing this care? I'll stop here. I think there is another hand.
Anna?
Yes, thank you, Diana. Maybe a bit beyond the scope of what your presentations were about, but coming back to the focus of the Circle project, I was wondering if you have any reflections of the differences between perception and attitude towards waste, biological waste, by consumers and by primary producers. Because in industrial agriculture, this is one story. How do you relate with the byproducts and that are coming as sort of waste, and the ones that we as individual consumers tackle with food waste or any other organic waste that we encounter? Do you see any major sort of conceptual differences in that?
I will jump in, but I think it's major. We are really faced with our household waste in this very immediate sense, right? I mean, it stinks in the kitchen if you don't take it out. It's you have to deal with it manually, right? I mean, it's a very immediate sense of it. And as a society, we tend to not to see industrial waste on the one hand, and there is specialization, and there are technologies, and there are methods of dealing with that on the company level that distances us from that waste. So and that's the paper that Aiste was reading was exactly this kind of how do we make that waste in terms of more visible, but also not see it as a bad thing? How do we think about all products as having value? How do we think about the future, right? I mean, that instead of looking at waste as something that comes from production, we think about a possibility and opportunity, both in terms of the household and in terms of the industrial agriculture and or other sectors, because in the industry that's already is happening, but for the consumers we tend to really see the kind of the negative aspect of waste. We cannot see how this will be transformed into products. So perhaps instead of telling the story of where the products come in, we have to have a story where they will go, right? What's going to happen from these products? And I think Aiste's and Renata's presentation addressed that. This kind of future narratives need to be included in promoting products and dealing with that. I think we have that point of the need of their thinking waste for as a future, that I think that's kind of coming from the research that we are doing, that reframing it in these ways that is a very natural for the industry to do, but for the public we don't have these narratives yet present, which are more optimistic on all kinds of ways. So I think it's a very good way of thinking and doing that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anda. Do we have more questions? It's a very good opportunity to vocalize them because we're nearing to the end of this webinar. So let's wait a little bit. Maybe we'll get some more questions. I guess no. Probably everything was very, very clear. So thank you for presenters, Aiste and Diana, and for all those who listen at us. And yeah, I guess we can end it. And
Thank you, Renata.
bye.
Thank you, everyone, for taking part and follow up on our project news. And we'll be having the last webinar by Ruralis. So keep posted on our developments. So thank you and have a nice evening, all of you. Bye.
Thank you.